11:51 p.m. My Chicago apartment was so quiet I could hear the second hand sweeping across the clock face. My phone lit up white light, sharp enough to make the whole room feel smaller. A message from my mother. We've discussed it as a family. From now on, you are no longer part of this family. Do not show up at any gatherings again. A few seconds later, Clara tapped heart. Maybe to them, erasing a child was as simple as pressing an icon. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop and pulled up every bill: electricity, water, mortgage, insurance, things I had quietly paid for many years. And I began shutting them off one by one. The screen blinked softly, as if their house in the Chicago suburbs flickered along with it. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're listening from, so I know I'm not the only one who has ever been pushed out by their own family. After canceling every payment, I thought the apartment would finally feel peaceful. But instead, that quiet rang like a warning I had ignored for many years. My River North apartment suddenly felt too large in that moment. Not because it was big, it was only a small 2-room space, but because the silence after that message made the walls feel like they were pulling away from me. I was still sitting at the table, the blue light from my laptop screen reflecting across the wooden surface. Down on the street, a Chicago night train cut through the air, low and steady like the heartbeat of a city that never slept. The cup of tea I made earlier was still giving off a faint curl of steam. How strange, to lose a family in just 3 lines of text. And yet no tears came, only the heater clicking on and off in the corner, and the blinking traffic light outside my window. Everything was too quiet. My phone vibrated. Then again, the screen lit up with the word Mom. I let it ring until it stopped. It vibrated again. Dad. Then Clara. 3 names that once meant home to me, now lined up only to ask the one question I knew they would use. What are you doing? Do you want us to be embarrassed? I still didn't pick up. The phone lay face down on the table. But even without seeing the screen, I could feel it lighting up, dimming, and lighting up again. Those cycles of light felt like the reluctant explanations I had heard too many times in my life. I drew in a slow breath, trying to feel my own body. No shaking, no pain, just a strange stillness, like I had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. I looked around the apartment. Everything was arranged exactly the way I had kept it for many years. Neat, clean, categorized. Nothing extra, nothing missing. I used to think keeping order was the only way to survive the chaos, because every time something happened in the family, whether Clara lost a job, or Mom fought with Dad, or they fell short on bill payments, everything came down on me. I was used to keeping the peace with my silence. I was used to biting my tongue so everything could just move on. But sitting here, in an apartment that was too quiet, I realized, for many years, my silence wasn't peace. It was a requirement that I keep paying, keep carrying on, and I had carried far more than I ever dared to admit. I pulled the laptop closer and opened a new file. The name appeared under my fingers without even thinking. Cross, Financial, Records. XLSX. The empty white screen looked like a room I had never dared to step into before. I placed the cursor on the first line. Date. Amount. Reason. Proof. I typed the first entry, 17th of February, Winthrop property tax, to avoid foreclosure. I remembered that day. I was at the office when Mom called, sobbing, saying that if the payment wasn't made today, they would lose the house. I wired the money before I even asked how much. Second line, 5th of June. Clara. Summer semester tuition. I still remembered Clara saying it was her only chance to study advanced design. But when I checked later, it turned out to be a cheap online course. And my real money had gone to her beach vacation. With every line I typed, the apartment grew heavier, not because of the past, but because of the realization that I had never really looked at the truth. Before I tell you what happened after those first few entries, Let me ask you something. If you ever felt like you were the only one who had to carry everything, would you keep going? Or would you stop? I stared at the file I had just opened. The lines of text glowing against the dark room. And in that moment, I understood something. They never believed I would stop. They were used to my silence. Used to me figuring things out. Used to me paying. They thought that message was the ending. But for me, it was only the opening chapter. Because a few minutes later, as I opened more old transactions, I discovered I had been supporting them far longer than the time they had ever supported me. To understand why, on the night they kicked me out of the family, I couldn't shed even a single tear. You need to know this. I had saved them so many times. The tears inside me had died a long time ago. I sat in front of my laptop, still feeling the warmth from the cup of tea beside me, even though the steam at the rim had already faded. Outside the window, Chicago at night reflected across the glass clusters of golden lights from the Franklin Bridge, cool blue neon from the cafe down the block, and cars sliding along damp lanes. All of it created a shimmering glow that made the room feel like the surface of a moving black river. On the screen, the file Cross, Financial, Records. XLSX was blank, an empty space waiting to be filled with the stories I once hid, even from myself. I placed my hand on the trackpad. Just scrolling down a single line made memories open up like old drawers I had shoved deep and locked away. And then, I let myself remember everything. I was 26 years old. That day, I still remember the scent of March wind whipping through the alley behind my office building. The gust was strong enough to blow the scarf off my neck. I was on my way to get lunch when my phone kept ringing nonstop. Mom, 3 missed calls. I called back. Her voice cracked like she had run from one end of the house to the other. Amelia, they're about to send the foreclosure notice for Winthrop Manor. Are you hearing me? They will take this house if we don't pay the taxes today. For a few seconds, I couldn't even process it. Foreclosure today. Why hadn't anyone told me sooner? But I didn't ask further. The panic in her voice made me react like a child programmed to solve everyone else's crisis. I ran into the nearest bank, my hands still freezing from the wind. I remember the glowing advertisements on the walls, the smell of printed paper, the clacking of money counters, and the sting in my chest when I watched my account balance drop by a large amount. But I still transferred it, without hesitation. That evening, I stopped by Winthrop Manor. It was a big, beautiful house, beautiful only when viewed from the street. Inside, it always smelled like old wood mixed with dampness. Mom hugged me tightly, tears still clinging to the corners of her eyes. You're truly the blessing of this family, she said. But in her eyes, I didn't see love, only relief. And I understood that to them. I was the child who was never allowed to fall. Another year passed. Clara called me when I was standing in line at Mariano's. Her voice was as whiny as it had been in high school, sis. The school is asking for summer semester tuition. I don't want to get suspended. Can you help me? I asked. Didn't Mom give you the money? She sighed like I was the unreasonable one, you know. Mom. And I spent it already. I paid her tuition. Once, then twice, then 3 times. I clenched my hand around the shopping basket as I remembered Clara posting on Instagram. She was in Florida. The ocean blue behind her. A new bikini. And a bright pink cocktail in her hand. Caption living my best life. Meanwhile, I was cutting my budget to fill the hole she created. There were times I opened my bank account, saw the number drop, and felt my chest tighten as if it were being squeezed. But I still continued. Because when someone said, "The family needs you," I didn't know how to say no. I remember clearly the morning my father was hospitalized. Mom called me right as I woke up. Your dad is in the ICU. We don't have money for the deposit. Amelia, I'm begging you. I drove to the hospital at a speed I still don't know how I wasn't fined for. In the ICU, I saw my father lying there, pale and weak. Beside him was the slow, Steady beeping of the heart monitor, sounding like a countdown clock. In the end, I was the one who signed the deposit papers. Using the money I had saved for my future, I didn't regret it. I didn't even think too much. But I remember clearly 2 days later, when he was moved to a regular room, Mom appeared wearing a brand new coat, the kind she loved but always said was too expensive. I looked at her, and the question slipped out almost involuntarily. "When did you buy that? I found a really good discount." She smiled. After the past few stressful days, I thought I deserved a little treat. I turned my face away so she wouldn't see my lips tremble. That was the first time I realized, in this family, whenever they faced a crisis, I was the one who paid the price. But when things were fine, they never remembered that I also needed rest. But there was one memory, a warm streak of light in those dark years, Grandma Eleanor. I brought groceries to her house on an afternoon when the snow was falling softly. Her home always smelled like cinnamon, baked pastries, and a warm golden light that felt like a hug. She placed her hand over mine. Thin but warm. "Amelia, you must be careful with your kindness." I laughed, teasing her. "I'm just helping a little." "No." She shook her head slowly. "You are not helping a little. You are carrying this entire family, and they have grown used to letting you carry. If you don't learn to stop, they will let you carry forever." He fell silent. She looked at me again, her eyes gentle but sharp, like a needle stitching an old wound. A good person is not someone who endures. A good person is someone who protects the part of themselves that is still human. I had forgotten those words for many years, but the night I opened that file, her voice returned like a bell. I blinked and returned to my River North apartment. Outside, the Wells Street train rumbled low and heavy. On the spreadsheet, the list of payments I had made stretched longer than I expected. Winthrop property tax, legal fees from the year Clara caused a car accident, summer tuition, Dad's hospital bills, roof repairs, overdue water bill, Clara's credit, card debt, 3 car insurance payments for Mom, 1 $2,000 emergency cash withdrawal. I was never given an explanation, for I scrolled all the way down and then back up again. Every line had a story, and every line had one thing in common. I was the rescuer. But no one rescued me. I leaned back in my chair, feeling an old kind of exhaustion melt away. Not fatigue, clarity. Before I tell you about the most painful payment on this list, let me ask you something. Have you ever paid for someone else's mistake so many times that they began to think it was simply your responsibility? If yes, leave a comment below, because in that spreadsheet, between dozens of unanswered expenses, there was one payment I had overlooked for many years. A payment that seemed small, but when I opened it, it became the very first doorway to the biggest truth about my family. There are roles in a family we do not choose, yet they hand them to us and demand we perform them perfectly. I had lived like that for more than 30 years until that night. Almost a full minute after I typed the last line into the spreadsheet, I simply sat still, looking around the apartment. Everything in this River North place had been arranged by me in the style of "don't inconvenience anyone." Books aligned, coats hung in perfect order, bills and documents tied into color-coded bundles. I once believed this neatness was the achievement of a stable life. But tonight, it looked more like evidence. Evidence that I had shrunk myself into someone who didn't dare bother anyone. Someone who organized everything, just so no one would have a reason to blame me. I looked down at my hands, my fingers trembling slightly. But not from fear. It was because I was beginning to see myself in a way I never had, not as a strong person, but as someone who had been forced into strength for far too long. When I closed my eyes, old sentences came back as if they were recorded somewhere in my memory. My mother used to say, "Clara is still young. She deserves to live comfortably. You always think like an old person." My father would smile gently but coldly. "Amelia, you really are the most practical one in the house, but that's also why you're so cold. And Clara, always Clara, you're capable. You have money. You should help when I need it." Those seemingly light sentences, when added up over many years, became invisible chains. I became the practical, dependable, responsible one, but their true meanings were: you don't get to complain, you don't get to fail, you don't get to need anyone. I was like the sturdy chair in a house. Everyone sits on it, but no one asks whether the chair is tired. I started to see clearly the cycle my family had created. They created problems. I solved the problems. They forgot the problems. And the cycle continued. They weren't cruel. They were just comfortable having me. In my family, everyone had a role. Mom controlled the emotions. Dad avoided conflict. Clara was the pampered center of attention, and I the one who carried more weight than a structural pillar. What hurt me wasn't the helping. I have never regretted helping. What hurt was that they saw it as a natural obligation, as if I was born to endure. The wind from the Chicago River brushed past the window frame, tapping lightly against the glass, as if reminding me there was a time when I believed silence kept the peace. But no, I kept silent because I was afraid that if I spoke, they would drift even further away, and I was afraid of being abandoned. I thought that if I did everything right, paid the bills on time, stayed quiet, didn't inconvenience anyone, they would appreciate me. But the truth was, I only helped them forget that I was human. I wasn't invisible. I was made invisible. They didn't see me as weak, because I wasn't allowed to be weak. They didn't see me tired, because I wasn't allowed to rest. They didn't see that I needed love, because I was always the one giving first. I leaned back in my chair, my hand brushing against Grandma Eleanor's picture frame. The warm lamplight reflected on its glass, making it look as if she were gazing at me through that dim glow. She once told me I needed to protect myself. I had not listened. But now, with the whole family kicking me out through a single text message, I finally understood. Some doors only open when you are forced to stand on the outside. Have you ever felt like you were born only to mend the cracks other people created, and in the end, no one remembered? You had a heart too. If you've ever lived that, I want you to know you're not alone. I turned off my laptop screen and walked to the window. Chicago was sinking into the bluish gray of early dawn. A new day was about to begin. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, thinking I might get a few hours of peace after a long night. But the truth was, just a few hours later, they would try to pull me back into the role I had just escaped. And that was when the storm would begin. If you're still watching this far, comment the number 1 so I can send you my heartfelt thanks. That morning, I thought I was finally safe after a long night, until my phone rang as if someone had just pulled the alarm for my entire life. Gray Chicago light slipped into the River North apartment as I opened my eyes. Dawn hadn't fully arrived yet, but the wind from the river thudded against the window pane in slow bursts, sounding like the tired breathing of an elderly person. I had barely stepped out of bed when the phone left face down on the kitchen counter the night before began vibrating in long, insistent waves, like urgent knocking at the door. I didn't need to look to know who it was, but I flipped the phone over anyway. 6 missed calls, Mom 3, Dad 2, Clara 1. I poured warm water into a cup and sat down. I hadn't even taken a sip when the phone lit up again. A call from Mom. I let it ring and ring until it stopped. 5 seconds later, she texted, "Amelia, what mess have you made? Why are the house bills showing late? You're embarrassing me in front of the neighbors." I set the phone down before I could exhale. Another message appeared, this time from Dad. "Sweetheart, let Dad handle things at home. Don't escalate this." I let out a quiet laugh, a sound without joy, just a natural reaction to hearing a line I had heard all my life. They had kicked me out of the family last night, and yet this morning, they talked as if we're the ones causing trouble. Clara sent a long text, full of exclamation marks. "What did you do?" Mom is stressed out. "The bills, the insurance, the accounts, everything is a mess. Are you trying to destroy this family?" Then another message immediately after. "Stop being childish." Childish one who had paid the property tax, hospital bills, insurance, and Clara's reckless spending for years. I was being called childish. The phone kept vibrating. Each buzz sliced through the quiet of the apartment like a pair of scissors cutting air. I turned on the phone's small speaker so it would automatically read incoming texts aloud. Amelia, you're breaking your mother's heart. How could you do this to us? What gives you the right to shut off all the services to the house? Not a single person asked, "Are you okay?" Not a single person asked, "Why did you have to do this?" Every message revolved around them. Their inconvenience. Their emotions. Their image. I understood then. They weren't panicking because they lost me. They were panicking because they lost the service labeled Amelia. I tried replying with one short, very polite line, "Mom. I only stopped the payments. I can no longer continue. I need time." She read it immediately, then sent back a message that was practically screaming through text. "No half measures. Who do you think you are? You are destroying this family. How selfish can you be?" Amelia. I sat still for a moment. I knew this feeling. This was the same guilt loop my family had used on me for years. They made mistakes. I fixed them. I grew tired. I was called selfish for daring to stop. I set the phone down and let the truth settle into me. A bitter but unmistakable truth. If I softened, even a little, they would drag me back into the old role. I stood by the window, looking down at the cars beginning to move along the street. Cold wind slipped through the frame, numbing the tips of my fingers. Chicago mornings weren't beautiful, but they were honest, and sometimes honest mattered more than beautiful. I thought about all the years I had been the balancer of the household. I thought about the Sunday dinner when Dad said I was too serious. I thought about every time Clara begged for money in that childish voice. I thought about every time Mom cried to manipulate me. And I realized something I had never dared to say out loud: I don't owe them anything anymore. I have spent my whole life keeping them intact. Now I only want to keep myself intact. I opened my contacts, scrolled to the letter N. Naomi Blake, attorney. I hesitated for 1 second. Just one. Then I pressed call. She picked up on the very first ring. Amelia Naomi's voice always carried both steel and warmth, like someone who had witnessed too much injustice and learned how to stand straight inside it. I spoke softly, almost whispering, I think. "I can't save them anymore." Naomi went silent for a few seconds. Then she replied, "Finally. You've said it, Amelia. Are you ready to face the truth? Because once you open this door, you can't go back to the old role." I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop. Dozens of payment lines stretching like a financial obituary of my life. "I'm ready," Naomi responded simply. "Then start gathering every document. Send them to me as soon as you can." And she hung up. No comfort. No promises. Only truth. And I knew that was the first time in years I called someone not to save them, but to save myself. Before I tell you what I discovered when I dug through those papers, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been called by your family only when they needed something from you, but when you needed something, they acted like they had never known you? I closed the laptop, my chest lighter, not because things were fine, but because I knew I was about to open a door my family never wanted anyone to open, and behind that door, buried deep in the documents they assumed I would never dare read carefully, was the very first stone that would collapse the entire Cross household. Because in those files I was about to uncover, there was something that, if true, would expose everything they had ever done to me under the light. There are truths that are not discovered. They simply wait until we are brave enough to look directly at them. I pulled the old metal cabinet by the kitchen corner, the one where I kept the things I never wanted to think about. The rusty hinge screeched, dry and sharp, as if it already knew something I didn't. Dust floated up in the dim afternoon light, forming a thin haze before my eyes. Inside the cabinet were 3 old cardboard boxes tied with thin rope. Their labels faded with the years 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, Family Misc. I pulled the last box onto the table. The rope snapped lightly the moment I touched it, as if it had been waiting to be opened for a long time. When the lid lifted, the smell of old paper and a hint of mold drifted out, the scent of things never spoken aloud at any family dinner. I brushed through the documents, the stiff paper grazing the tips of my fingers. Each folder was labeled in my own handwriting: utilities, emergency transfers, medical support, Clara tuition. I arranged them neatly on the table, and in that strange moment, I could almost hear my grandmother Eleanor's voice, Amelia. Keep your papers safe. One day, the truth will need witnesses. Back then, I was too young to understand her. Today, that sentence felt prophetic. I opened the first folder. Electric bills, water bills, property tax, car insurance, pages that looked like the diary of someone who lived to carry other people's burdens. Every month, my name appeared. My name, but their responsibilities. I flipped through them one by one. Everything was familiar. Everything once made me believe this is my job. This is love. Back then, I didn't know. One-sided love is another form of imbalance. And imbalance, when prolonged, becomes abuse. Among the 2019 documents, a different sheet caught my eye. A bank transaction authorization form with the logo of First Lake Bank. The name printed on it, Amelia Cross. My full name, but right beneath it was the signature. And that signature was not mine. I lifted the paper toward the window to inspect each stroke carefully. The A curved more than the way I wrote it. The tail of the cross trembled slightly. Leaning left, I had seen this handwriting my whole life. Not Mina, but my mother's. Beatrice's. My chest tightened. The way it tightens when you hear bad news but can't react yet. I set the paper down, though my hands were still shaking. If this was forged, then it wasn't an accident. It was intentional. I opened the folder beneath it and found a sealed white envelope. Typed neatly on the front, Eleanor Trust withdrawals. I sat upright. Wind from the Chicago River slammed against the glass. As if signaling something, I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement from the year my grandmother died. One small, tidy, cold line, minus $40,000. Withdrawn from Eleanor Trust account, ending in 0228, signature Amelia Cross memo home renovation. I reread it 3 times. I never had an account ending in 0228. My parents renovated their house that exact year. And if the signature on that authorization form had been forged, then this signature. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling suddenly unsteady. The apartment was so silent I could hear the faint metal click from the kettle behind me. $40,000. My grandmother Eleanor's money. Money she saved for me. For a life you deserved to have. And they had taken it. Using my name. Using my signature. Pretending to be me. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased. Erased from the very inheritance meant to honor me. I leaned back in my chair. Chicago's light had shifted into dull lead gray. Like a curtain of sorrow draped across the city. I tried to inhale deeply. But the breath caught halfway. Not because of the money. Not because of the deceit. But because they had taken what my grandmother left as her final blessing for me. I remembered her hand stroking my hair the night I cried, because Clara said something cruel. I remembered her voice. One day, whoever uses you will have to face the light. This was the light. But the price of seeing it hurt so much, I had to close my eyes. I took photos of each document and sent them to Naomi. Each ping echoed in the quiet room. The latte on the table had long gone cold. Naomi called back after 3 minutes. Amelia. Just one word. Her voice wasn't cold. Wasn't soft. Just serious. I've reviewed everything, she said. And Amelia, this is no longer a family matter. I stayed silent, my hand gripping the table edge to stay present. That signature is not yours. That withdrawal is unlawful. If it was done by your family, that's forgery and misappropriation. I still couldn't form words. Naomi continued. Do you want to initiate legal action? Because once we begin, there's no going back. I looked at the -$40,000 document on the table. My grandmother Eleanor's face is in my memory. My mother, Clara. Each figure was like a shadow overlapping until they formed the truth I had avoided for years. I whispered I have to protect myself. Naomi. Then gather every file. Naomi replied, We start tonight. Have you ever read a single piece of paper that changed the meaning of your entire life? I leaned down to gather the documents, moving on to the final stack. But when I lifted it, I noticed a pale yellow envelope lying at the bottom, its edges frayed, as if it had been waiting there for many years. There was no name on it, just a small handwritten line for when she's ready. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my grandmother Eleanor's. My hands froze. Inside the envelope was something that, if I opened it, I knew my life would never be the same again. And that paper inside was the real reason the Cross family would eventually collapse. You don't need to lay a hand on revenge for it to happen. Sometimes, the truth knows exactly how to find the people who tried to run from it. That night, Chicago darkened quickly. Winter had arrived, and the chilled air made the city lights press against the window like sharp golden cuts. I was making a cup of mint tea when a text from Naomi arrived. Demand letter sent. Asset freeze initiated. A few short words. Calm. Sharp as a blade. Naomi was always like that, never dramatic. But every action she took carried the weight of a verdict. I set my phone down, barely lifting the cup when it began vibrating nonstop. Not from Naomi. From the Cross household. From the people who had kicked me out of the family with a single text message. Mom called first. The call lasted so long my phone grew warm. When I didn't answer, she left a message, Amelia. What did you do? Why is my bank account frozen? Then another. They said it's due to verification issues. Explain this. I didn't reply. A minute later, Dad called. His voice in the voicemail sounded like he was trying to swallow chaos. Sweetie, what you're doing is causing trouble for the whole family. Let your mother and me handle this internally. Internally. The phrase they always used to pull me back into their vortex. Then came Clara. Clara called. 5 times. Calling. Then calling again. And again. None of them mentioned forging my signature. None asked if I was okay. They only asked, how do we make things go back to how they were, at 9:30 p.m. My mother started doing what she always did when she wanted to regain control. She posted on Facebook. The post began with, when children become successful, they forget who raised them. My heart is breaking, and I have no one to confide in. Underneath were the predictable sympathy. Comments, stay strong. Sis, kids are ungrateful these days. Poor you. I read them without anger. Just exhaustion. But then, someone broke the pattern. Aunt Lillian, who I thought barely remembered my existence, commented, Amelia has been paying your mortgage for years. Tell the truth. Another comment, did you use her name to borrow money? The entire thread froze. No new likes. No new comments. My mother's post began sinking like a stone into water, disappearing under a silence she could not control. Then, one by one, people started messaging me. An aunt who once borrowed money and never returned it wrote, I'm sorry. Dear, I didn't know things were this serious. Another Amelia. You're not wrong. They've relied on you too much. Even an uncle who never liked me messaged. They owe me $5,000 from last year. Never paid. Reading it felt like watching the family map redraw itself from scratch. What I thought was a foundation turned out to be just paint. And beneath that paint was rot. My phone rang. Naomi was video calling. I answered. On the screen was Naomi's face. The blue light of her monitor reflecting in her eyes. Amelia, she began. What you sent is only the surface. My heart tightened slightly. Naomi continued. There are multiple small transactions. 300, 800. $1,200. All signed under your name. The pattern is consistent. Not once. 8 years. I had to brace my hand against the table to keep steady. Naomi kept going. There's also a credit registration under your name. Clara might be affected in her credit score. That's why she's panicking. I closed my eyes. 8 years. 8 years of them using my finances like a private pipeline. At 11:02 p.m., Clara sent a long message. Almost screaming, "What did you do to my credit? I can't buy plane tickets anymore," Mom said. "You caused this, fix it now." I finished reading and set the phone down, feeling the blood in my body no longer hot. 5 minutes later, Mom called again, her voice breaking. "Sweetie, everything is falling apart. Please pick up." And Dad sent one simple line: "The family can't survive if you continue like this." Their family. Not Mina. I opened the window. The night wind blew hard, carrying Chicago's bitter cold. Below, cars crawled along the street, their red and yellow lights flickering against my face like distant stars. And I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't frightened. I no longer felt responsible. I wasn't thrilled by their chaos. I just felt light. Light. Like someone who had finally dropped a bag of stones they had carried their whole life. Thinking it was part of their body, I sent a short email to all 3 of them. From now on, please direct all communication through my attorney. I am requesting nothing more than transparency. Polite. Calm. Not a single exclamation mark. And that calmness made me feel grown. In a different kind of way. Have you ever stood outside a storm you used to be trapped in and realized you aren't afraid anymore? I was about to turn off the lights for bed when Naomi texted Amelia. "We need to talk. There's something you don't know yet." I stared at that message for a long time. I thought I had seen all the truth. Turns out, my story still had another major twist ahead. After the biggest storms in life, the thing that surprises us isn't the chaos, but the moment the first wave of peace arrives. A gentleness in the sunlight I'd never noticed before. No more relentless phone calls. No more long messages that felt like old knives reopening old wounds. Just winter light passing through the glass, touching the wooden table, leaving behind a thin golden streak like a quiet congratulations. I made a cup of bergamot tea and inhaled its familiar scent. It no longer smelled like worry, just warmth. I walked around the apartment, sensing for the first time in weeks that this was a place I lived in, not a place I hid in. I gathered things I no longer needed and put them into a cardboard box: old documents, a few photos that made my chest ache, and the obligatory gifts from the Cross family. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to feel lighter. Nina 17 a.m. A message from Naomi Amelia. Everything is almost done. The court confirmed the freeze order. They'll have to take responsibility for their part. I read it again and again. Not out of shock, but because I was learning how to let a message arrive without making my heart clench anymore. I replied, "Thank you, Naomi. It feels like I've finally been able to breathe after so many years." Naomi responded with a single emoji, like just enough. Exactly her style, nothing extra. Nothing missing, like a steady hand on my shoulder. I put on my coat, wrapped a gray wool scarf around my neck, and stepped outside. The cold air slapped my cheeks, but it felt real, not heavy. The Chicago River still had a thin layer of ice along its edges. Wind skimmed across the surface, making the water tremble in soft ripples. A train passed under the Roosevelt Bridge, pulling a cold draft with it. But it no longer made me shrink into myself. I walked slowly, slow enough to hear the sound of my shoes meeting the pavement. Each step sliced away another piece of my past. Not cutting to forget, cutting to live. I looked at the tall buildings reflecting the morning light and realized I was no longer straining to hold the Cross family upright. For the first time, I saw a future in which they didn't appear in every decision I made. There was a strange kind of peace, like the quiet after strong winds pass through. When I returned home, a message from Evan. an old coworker, appeared. "Are you doing okay? Let's grab coffee sometime. I think you deserve a gentle day." I smiled. Not the polite smile I used to give, but a smile that opened something. Evan was someone who saw me working late nights. Someone who once asked why I always put other people's lives before my own. Back then I always answered, because family is family. Now, I wasn't sure that answer still held true. I replied, "Thank you. Maybe this weekend." Not a promesse. Not a rejection. Just a slightly open door enough for light to enter. That night, as I was rearranging the box I'd placed under the table, my hand brushed against something solid. At the corner of the box was the yellow envelope I had found earlier. I picked it up. The lamplight revealed the faded handwriting more clearly, for when she's ready, my heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, but from reverence for what was about to come. I sat down, placed the envelope on my lap, and opened it carefully. Inside, there were no financial documents, no receipts, no evidence, just a handwritten letter folded into 3 creases. The paper aged with time. The moment I saw my grandmother's handwriting, my eyes stung my Amelia. If you are reading this letter, it means you have begun to ask a question, one you've always feared you didn't have the right to ask. I read each line slowly. You have tried to keep everyone whole, even when they didn't try to keep you. I breathed deeply. Tears welled, but didn't fall. Love is not a place for people to step on you. Love is the place where you are the lightest. My fingers tightened on the paper. Remember this. You have the right to choose your own peace. And you have the right to walk away from places where you're only loved when you're useful. A single tear slid down warm. Soft. Not painful. I leave you not money, but freedom. Use it. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. Not out of grief, but because I finally understood. She had seen me long before I learned to see myself. Have you ever set down a burden you thought was duty, only to realize it was just an invisible chain? I placed the letter into my nightstand drawer. The room glowed softly under the warm lamp. Like Eleanor's embrace, I lay down. I feeling so light I was almost translucent. Tomorrow would be different. In a better way. In my way. And the very next morning. Something small, but enough to shift my entire life into a brand new chapter was waiting. That morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. Not happiness. Not sadness. But lightness. Chicago sunlight slid through the glass, laying thin golden streaks across the floor like a blanket of quiet peace. I sat in the chair near the window, my cup of bergamot tea still rising with warm steam. Outside, the city buzzed in its own familiar way. But inside this small apartment for the first time in many years, nothing made my chest tighten. No messages. No calls. No demands. No blame. No you must. Just me. And a silence that felt beautifully mature. I opened the drawer and took out the yellow letter Eleanor had left. Touching it no longer hurt. There was only a quiet gratitude. I reread the line I had etched into my heart the night before. Let yourself remain whole. I used to think being whole meant keeping the family together at all costs. But it turned out, being whole meant not abandoning myself among people who always demanded more. I took a small vase and placed 3 white tulips in it, the flower Eleanor loved. I set them on the windowsill, right where the sunlight touched. A small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of a life I had never once allowed myself to choose. I opened a notebook and wrote my first sentence in years words meant only for me today. I begin belonging to myself. I looked back on my journey all the years believing that endurance was love, that sacrifice was duty, and that silence was peace. But the truth was, boundaries are not cruelty. Freedom is not betrayal. Letting go is not failure. And sometimes, family is not the place we come from, but the place where we feel safe. I did not avenge them. I merely stopped hurting myself for them. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you see a part of your own journey somewhere in mine, please like and subscribe to my channel so I can share more meaningful stories about life with you. Share your story below. Your voice matters.